Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, hosted by the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. I'm very proud and excited to be joined by Aaron and Justin here from the Tilco team, national government. They're going to talk to us a little bit today about their project around revitalizing Indigenous language through digital technology. Thank you for joining us today, guys. Before we begin anything else, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm zooming in from the traditional ancestral, unceded, and occupied territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. I'd also like to acknowledge the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and kind of providing the platform that we have here today. So quick trigger warning before we jump into anything. The topics we cover can sometimes be sensitive or emotionally triggering. If that's you for today, if you know that's you, please encourage you to access the support network. Talk to your friends, elders, family members, counselor, whatever that looks like for you. Please don't hesitate to access those resources if need be. So introductions. Briefly, my name is Cole. I'm from the Chalco First Nation. I'll be facilitating the session today, so kind of trying to pass your questions along to Aaron and Justin. Other Learning Circle team members in the room today, the digital room today, are Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Winona, our program assistant. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to you guys, maybe to start us off with a more thorough introduction.
All right, yeah, I'm Aaron Plahn. I'm the language technology lead at Tsilhqot'in National Government. And I just want to also quickly acknowledge that our Tsilhqot'in National Government office, and as well, I also live on traditional Secwepemc territory. So very happy to work and do business in this beautiful territory.
Yeah, I'm Justin Bambrick. I am a junior front-end developer with Tsilhqot'in National Government, and our offices are on the traditional territories of the Secwepemc people.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So without further ado, maybe we'll start with we'll continue with the PowerPoints there. Hey, Aaron?
All right, sounds great. All right, so I'm Aaron Plahn, and I'm the language technology lead at Tsilhqot'in National Government. And today I'm going to talk about a capacity building initiative we recently undertook. And I'll be presenting the project from the perspective of the mentor. And then once I'm done, you'll hear from Justin, who will present the perspective of the apprentice. So I work in the field of language technology, but prior to getting into this field, I was working in the field of scientific computing. So I did a bachelor's degree in physics with a math minor at TRU in Kamloops. And I followed that up with a master's degree in physics from SFU, where I studied cosmology with Levon Pagosian. So, I'd stay up all night writing numerical code to do these really complex calculations to draw these nice looking ellipses. And now what do I do? Well, now I do full stack web and mobile app development, do database administration and language data wrangling, and do a little bit of audio tech work, and do a little bit on the system administration operations side. And I love to teach and share everything I learn about all of these subjects with anybody I can, because there's a whole lot of layers to this onion, and we need a lot of hands on deck. So what we do as a department, our language technology department at Tsilhqot'in National Government, we do web and mobile language games informed by natural language acquisition. We have a digital morphological dictionary designed custom for Tsilhqot'in, featuring thousands of audio clips created with an AI-powered rapid clip creation pipeline. And all of these things and more live at our Tsilhqot'in language website. And so if you're excited about any of that technology, that's the subject of another talk. But if you want to just reach out to us to talk tech, we'd be happy to. But there's another thing that we do really well at TNG and also in our department specifically, and that is tech capacity building. And so today, what we want to talk about is a major tech capacity building initiative that we've undertaken over the last year and a half or so. But before I get there, I just give you a little bit of historical context. So I joined TNG in 2015, and I was working in the file room with Bella Alphonse, who is a lifetime language champion who does transcription, translation, curriculum development, has worked with linguists for years. And there was a real synergy. We had this nice combination of talents, and we ended up putting together some pretty innovative prototypes for some of the technology that would follow. We were part of SFU's SHIRK grant. Actually, for several years, we were part of that project with Marianne and Ron Ignis and a whole bunch of amazing language groups and tech groups out there. Really gave us a chance to start experimenting more with some of the technologies and some of the direction we wanted to go. In 2017, we received approval from a Council of Chiefs to publish our language website. And the negotiations branch of our organization was able to secure some stable funding for some positions in language and education. And none of what I'm going to present today would have happened if it weren't for those stable positions. Around this time as well, I published the first set of our mobile apps. And at this time, I was already realizing, man, this is a lot of work on the technical side. And we're going to need more hands on deck if we're going to do some of these, these more bigger and broader dreams that we have in mind. If we're going to bring that to life, we're really going to need to expand the team. And so it was around this time that the vision kind of started to form to do some capacity building. And going forward from there, in 2018, our colleagues, Crystal Rain Harry and Graham Gillies, along with Radio Rob Hopkins from the Yukon, founded 104.5, which has now grown to a network of 6 bilingual Tzelkotian radio stations in the communities. And that year, I also received a commitment to fund digitization of William Meyer's dictionary project. And William has been recording diligently ever since. He's got about 150,000 words and sample sentences from his dictionary project. And he's just been recording tirelessly. I imagine that he's probably in his cabin recording as we speak. In 2019, Bella and I were fortunate to be invited to the Tech Showcase at a really awesome language conference in Hawaii, and got to do a lot of really great networking there. And in 2019, we brought Riley Myers on board through K-Tech on the job training funding. And so he was kind of the first one to give a go at this model that I'm going to present today. And around the same time, we also had Blake Sellerson as a summer student. But it was after this, in 2019 in August, that we received a major Indigenous language technology grant from the National Research Council. And that was a real game changer because, we'd been pulling in these minor grants that were trying to piece lots of little things together. And here we just had the chance to just go all out, and we decided to, put a lot of our energy and a lot of our efforts into capacity building through that project. And so if we back up to, that point in 2018, what was the vision? Well, the vision was to create a culturally safe hub and provide apprentices with hands-on projects in technology. This could be audio tech, web development, mobile app development, system administration, to give apprentices hands-on experience with language data, doing things like anomaly detection, text alignment, audio editing, interviewing elders, and working in group language lessons and group translation. And all of this so we can expand our in-house capacity to build innovative tools for language documentation. And so here's our team during this project. So Bella Alphonse was our language advisor. She continued to do tons of transcription and translation and completing and recording really complex verb paradigms. And she also provided mentorship to a lot of our learners. Additional language consultants were William Myers, who's just working tirelessly on his dictionary project and does a lot of translation work as well. And Mariah Myers, who has been reviewing some tapes recorded with elders by her family in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and just tirelessly working to transcribe and to make notes and work out permissions and make sure everything's known about that digitized collection. And she's also on her own project, she's very into adult language education right now. So we're very fortunate to have her on board to be working with mentoring some of the apprentices in the language. Helen Hake Brown, who is an award-winning Tsailhqot'in filmmaker, joined us for a stint as a cultural researcher, and she continues on as a collaborator now. And she is very focused on doing some historical and cultural research, working very hard with her mother, Mariah, and her auntie, Linda Smith. She really wants to get her script right on this. She's got a multi-year project to create a Tsailhqot'in war film in Tsailhqot'in. And so she really wants to get the details right. So she's really working hard doing research with elders, looking back at the archives. And we're very fortunate to have her as part of the team. And of course, I was part of this as well. And then there was an entire roster of apprentices. So I'll show you pictures of the apprentices, and I'll tell you what they were doing when they started out here. So Riley Myers, who I mentioned before, came on as a technical assistant. And if you take one look at that photo, now you know Riley pretty well. That's Riley in a nutshell. Blake Sellers has been a summer student 2 years, and we're hoping to have him back for a third year this summer. Justin Bambrick will speak to you after, and he came in as a technical assistant. Racine Jeff brings a background in applied business technology, and she used some of her skill set to work at digitizing and formatting language materials. And she also did a lot of work with recording with elders and also gave us some admin assistance. Braden Boyd, before he even came in as a technical assistant, he knew he was into podcasting and radio, and that's the direction he wanted to go. And so he came in and hit the ground running with audio tech work. And halfway through the project, some new funding came in, and he became our digitization technician. And he even had his own summer student. So Caden Harry came in as a summer student and was the digitization assistant. Okay, so where did all of this happen? So this is our studio. This is one picture of our studio. But if you'd like to see the entire studio in more detail, you can check out Blake Sellers' capstone project from his first year. So 360.tsailhqot'inlanguage.ca is where you can see Blake's 360 tour of our studio, which he created with Mozilla A-Frame. All right, so what method did we use? So everything starts with an open-ended technical assistant position, and you get exposure to multiple fields as an apprentice. And the idea is eventually you'll choose your specialization, one field or maybe a closely related portfolio of fields that you want to get more exposure to. And within maybe 6 months to a year, hopefully you've moved into a more specialized position and you're more focused on gaining some expertise in this domain. Extremely hands-on, but there's always dedicated time to learn. So we're not so production oriented that we short circuit the learning cycle. And there's heavy student involvement in developing the learning plan. Okay, so let's take a look at the results. So before I went through our roster of apprentices, and I introduced them with their titles as of say 12 to 18 months ago. So now let's check back in and see what everybody's up to now. Riley Myers is now an IT technician at the TNG, our parent organization. And I should mention that Riley works with Zach Alphonse, who is also a nation member, who's come on as another IT technician. So this initiative is a part of a broader tech capacity building initiative at TNG. And I think TNG as an organization is really good at capacity building. I also think of our GIS department, who has a GIS apprentice, Terry Ann Elkins, who's from the nation and learning GIS on the job. And then, you know, and many other non-technical fields, we've had a lot of success as well. Justin Bambrick, he's now our junior front-end developer, and he's going to show you some of his work. He's doing some really great work with web design and front-end development. Racine Jeff is now the community radio coordinator, and she leads a team of 3 or 4 employees and volunteers and contractors, and runs a network of 6 bilingual radio stations. Braden Boyd is a BCIT student. He's in the radio broadcasting program, and he's also an on-call studio technician for Tsailhqot'in Radio. And we feel like he's got a really bright future ahead of him in radio. And Blake Sellers is still in high school, but he's got a killer portfolio. Okay, so what are the things that worked well? We had this idea of a makerspace, kind of a joint vision with radio with Graham Gillies at the time. And so that computer lab that we showed, it also doubled as a makerspace where we just every once in a while just open things up to the public, and you can drop in and there's somebody who's an expert at say web development, or somebody who will help you install Linux on your old computer. Or what have you. And it was a really great way to see, well, okay, who's dropping in on their own time, who's showing an interest, who's really excited to get their hands on this stuff, because I think it's really important if you're going to do this that you kind of vet your candidates through that process. It's not always about what they already know so much as the interest and the potential, and the makerspace just brings that out. I think I coined this acronym. So we had a RACROB, a redundant array of cheap refurbished Optiplex boxes. So in other words, get in touch with Computers for Schools, get a whole bunch of old computers that your apprentices can just tear apart, put back together, and they're not going to be any trouble if they break anything. Really important to have that. I think it's important to have a balance of artistic freedom and structure. You don't want to be so rigid that the apprentice feels like they have no choice and no say in what they're doing, but you don't want to give so much freedom that nothing ever gets done. Project-oriented approach, an apprentice would typically have a major project that they'd be working on that was kind of theirs to push forward, and then they may have a few other tasks that they're involved in on the side, but it was really project-oriented. Apprentices got their hands on language data. Immersion in the home is the best way to learn. Immersion in an immersion school might be the next. But if that's not an option, for young difficulty people to be able to spend their day working with language data and working with language experts, it's just really powerful to see how much language learning happened while still pushing the technical work ahead. And so there was lots of interaction with language experts and elders. And then also, through that early stage where you get to survey different fields, you get to try out, see what goes on in the different phases of the project. We don't want to spread our apprentices thin, but it's nice to know that most apprentices have had exposure to a couple other things that are going on here. So if anybody gets hired at Amazon, which is our 2021 really positive spin on getting hit by a bus, we're not worried. There's somebody else who knows enough about what that person was doing that they can keep the project moving forward. And what I'm really excited about is train the trainer. We already saw Justin work with Blake and do some mentorship with Blake, and Braden do some mentorship with Caden. And so I'm really excited to see more of that down the road as we get to the second generation, where now the apprentice becomes the mentor. Okay, so what are some lessons learned? I guess this first one is just more of a word of caution. You have to have capacity to build capacity. So if you have some technical strength in your organization, and you know that that person is willing to mentor, they're game to mentor, then go for it. Be careful. Don't think you're just magically going to, if you don't have the capacity to, say, be doing app development in-house, don't think that you can just bring the apprentice on without identifying a mentor first. So be careful about that. Experienced independent learners tend to succeed in this model. So most of our apprentices had completed maybe a year or two of university. Maybe they came in with, their own website, their own podcast series, some kind of tech project, maybe a game that they built, and or they came in with a portfolio from the university program. Typically, this would be a good sign that somebody's going to succeed in this model. If somebody is not quite there, they're not ready to be an independent learner, they need step-by-step instructions and check-ins regularly every hour, it's probably not going to work as well in this model. So that's kind of a word of caution there. Budget for administrative support. I think we've all learned our lessons the hard way there. And remember, others working in this field, you don't have to do it all at once. No, really you do. Time is of the essence. So it's always a challenge if an elder shows up and has knowledge that they'd like to share, or if somebody shows up with some tapes that are disintegrating before your eyes. It's how do you not stop what you're doing and record or digitize? And that's always the challenge. And we found that the open office concept doesn't work. Have that creative lab where everybody gets together to do the creative work, but also make sure you have some quiet spaces too where people can have a balance and do some focused work as well. Okay, so with that said, so that's where we've been. So now where are we going? So looking ahead, so as you can see, a lot of our team is working in different departments and pushing forward their own initiatives now. But Justin and I continue to work focusing on new technologies. We're hoping to have Blake back this summer. And so what we're doing is we have a whole series of technologies. Many of them are one-offs and built with different tools sometimes. And so we're trying to streamline everything and bring it into one project, which we're branding as our language hub. So we want to get fresh web and mobile builds of our next generation language apps. We're looking to eventually have an admin panel and some custom research tools where we can actually manage some of this data, where our language experts can have some custom tools. And right now we've been working on our custom API. So we've got a working prototype and staging, and we're using that as we develop some new features. We're trying to flesh out our model, our data model, and we hope to get that into production. And we're working on integrating some of our third-party open source systems. So for example, our radio department uses an open broadcaster software, another great open source project. And we've been working with their developers looking at how can we archive content from our radio system, or how can we programmatically publish content to our radio system. Automatic speech recognition, we've been really inspired by some presentations we've seen from Maori and Hawaii at the success that there's been working with a relatively small amount of data and using a tool called Mozilla Deep Speech. And so we think that we're approaching the critical mass of data required thanks to Bella and William just tirelessly recording for years. They've recorded all of these complex paradigms, and then many other speakers have done a lot of recording. And so when we crunch the numbers, we think we're getting close to the amount of data we'll need to possibly make automatic speech recognition work, which would be a game changer, especially considering how much language content's being recorded for radio, and the fact that, you know, likely it'll never all be transcribed, but it could be searchable. So we're also looking forward to new collaborations. So continuing on our collaboration with Helen Hank Brown and her Chilcotin War film research. We've been working a lot with Jeff Horner, whom we met through Helen, who in addition to being a proposal writer is really technically capable, really good with tech. And so he's working on a Haida interactive atlas. And so we're doing a lot of open source collaboration with him. And we also work a lot with Scott Emmons and his portal development team. So they have a GIS portal that our GIS department uses, and it's quite well-known open source software in BC. And he introduced us to Takla's language team, and they have a related language. And so there's a real synergy there, and we're really looking to ramp up that collaboration and see where that goes. And of course, we want to do additional mentorship. So we want to continue to identify and develop local talent, probably at a bit slower pace. And we want to, you know, train the trainer. So maybe now Justin's mentoring somebody, or when Braden's back from school, he'll be mentoring somebody, or maybe Racine will be mentoring somebody. We want to look at possible partnerships with universities or tech institutes, because, you know, at some point the question is, okay, well, what about certification or credentialing? So that's definitely something that's on the map for us. And we're probably going to need a bigger space. And so that's basically all I have. So I'll leave you with some links here. Like I said, if you want to talk on the more technical details, I forgot to put my GitHub on here, but just shoot me an email or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. If you want to check out tsaskotinilanguage.ca, that's our language website. We're always adding more, and Justin's working really hard. So keep an eye on that. It's in active development. You'll see a lot of cool stuff coming up there periodically. And then tsaskotin.ca is TNG's main website. Yeah, check out those links and get a hold of me if you'd like to know more about the technical side, or if you want to look at doing your own capacity building initiative and you want some more detailed advice. I'm happy to share any information I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron, very much for that presentation. So I think maybe what we'll do here is we have some questions that have piled up, so we'll take a brief little break here. address some of the questions, and then we'll move on to Justin's presentation. Firstly, my question was, looking at your mentorship program, I just want to confirm, it seemed like it was the case, but were all the apprentices, rather, were they all from the nation?
Let's see. So almost everybody was from the nation. Blake is from Soda Creek, so he's Shuswap, and Carrier from El Gacho. And so everybody else, well, let me just pull my slides back up and I'll run through because I can tell you what community everybody's from. Oh, and unfortunately, there's got to be a way to back through these without backing through every bullet point.
It's totally okay. We don't need to go through them individually. I was just curious from a programming standpoint, if that was something that you guys had really kind of honed in on, is that we want to build tech capacity within the nation by allowing the community members to work with the language in this space.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Riley's from Unasitain, Blake's from Soda Creek and El Gacho, so neighboring nations. Justin's from Tlatin Koch, Racine, I believe Tlatin Koch. I think she also has ties to Tsait Dal. Braden's from Tsait Dal. Caden, I believe, is from Tsait Dal. But definitely the main emphasis was on focusing on building capacity within the nation, and also anybody that's from neighboring nations is going to be a high priority. But really, that's the goal, is to get young Tsaikot people to have the chance not only to learn some really relevant tech skills, but then to also be immersed in the language really as they're doing some of this work. So that was a big part of the vision.
Another question I had there is related to that piece of working within the language, and it seems as though you had a lot of elders, or a couple of key elders and knowledge keepers, come in and share the language with your team. How important was that, the interface between to replicate a generational learning model, I guess, in terms of the elders teaching language to essentially to the tech team, to the recording team, and then in a way the elders also becoming more familiar with tech themselves? Was that also an important benefit to the program?
Yeah, it's absolutely. We're very fortunate. We have some pretty techie elders, and you know, um, William will produce his own videos with subtitles in the language, and Bella's just a whiz with all kinds of different software. She's and Mariah's pretty good with computers too. I mean, I know other places that their speakers maybe don't even read and write the language. And I should say our roster of language experts are all very well versed in the writing system. And that really, if you don't have that, that really changes what you can do, because you don't have to write the language. It's, a lot of these languages weren't traditionally written, so it's not any judgment on your knowledge as a speaker. But as far as the practical side of getting the work done, if you don't have that writing system to be able to put a name to things, that all of a sudden it becomes quite tricky. Or maybe you have to bring in a linguist or somebody who's comes in to handle that piece, and it just makes it a much bigger task to do some of this work. Without our roster of language experts and really the number of fluent speakers we have, it would really be really difficult to do a lot of this work. And I really like seeing that opportunity for the intergenerational language learning, especially on the job. It's really difficult, and I think that's one of the challenges, especially the age. Most of our apprentices were, say, 20 to maybe 35, 40 range, and that's exactly the range that's really struggling the most with the language, and don't get enough exposure to the language. So to get that generation working with the next generation, which is the youngest generation of fluent speakers, and then even the generations beyond that, and sometimes working with audio that was recorded with elders that are no longer here, some of the really high language even. So just seeing, I guess there's multiple generations, and and then what really excited me too is during the first lockdown, work from home. I had a couple of the apprentices, I know Racine once and Braden once, had said, "Oh, I'm working with my younger sibling or my children on the language, and teaching them some of what I've learned." And so I thought that was really an exciting piece.
Great. Thanks. So then a couple questions from our audience here. Denise from McGill University says, I would like to hear more about the dictionary / recording you mentioned. If we have some time at the end of the session, maybe we'll circle back to that piece.
Okay.
But the question is, would the team have any ideas about how to approach intertribal / multiple languages or language groups from one studio? Do you have any experience with that, or would you have any kind of words of advice, I suppose, for Denise?
Like I said, we do have an apprentice who is from neighboring nations, and he's quite strongly connected to El Gacho, which is a very, very closely related group, very, very similar language. And he would always speak fondly of his language teacher, Janie Jack, from when he used to live out at El Gacho, and Janie was really close friends with Bella. So it was really kind of interesting to see the connections. And what was interesting is Blake would be, and he mostly writes code, but he'd be around as a lot of the work in the language was being done, and he'd be hearing the Tzechloting language a lot, and he'd throw some of the greetings back and forth. And then one day out of the blue, we were doing a round circle, and everybody was just throwing some little introductions out and everything, and he just started throwing out some carrier language, and it was like he'd gotten his confidence from being around it, that it just it kind of enabled him to just be loud and proud with it. And one thing I'd like to see is maybe down the road he'll end up working with his language, right? And maybe some of the tech skills he learns with us could be transferred. And so, like I said, we have collaborations. We're looking at collaborations with Takla, with Haida, and I should acknowledge New Hulk Radio, Balakula. They've helped a lot to get our radio off the ground. Banshee and Spencer down there are just awesome, and they're just experts on radio. They know everything about radio, and it's amazing what they've done with such a small team over the years. And so I could definitely see it working. I mean, politics are always tricky, and it's something I'm not good at. I love working with language, and I love working with technology especially, but I like it when there's no politics, and it's almost impossible to avoid, but I like to just get down to business and do the work and not worry about politics. But I think if you start talking about having a studio for multiple language groups doing one initiative together, maybe, yeah, it's all going to depend on the politics and the human side of things, and how do you work out those relationships. And as a technical person, I tend to shy away from that because I tend to get myself in trouble unintentionally. So but I think it would make a lot of sense. You start talking economy of scale, right? It's the tricky thing with universities. I've been a sessional instructor for just about every university under the sun without really leaving Williams Lake since I moved back up after grad school. And just from a financial point of view, they want to have 18 or 25 students, and that's one of the tricky things. Is we don't need 18 audio techs, we don't need 18 front-end developers, we don't need 18 IT technicians, we need one or two. And so from the economy of scale and the feasibility point of view, I think that might be the model to look at, really, to get the numbers you would need to, and also it would be much more efficient. It's pretty tricky to mentor people in all of these different areas at once. It really, like I said, it takes self-directed students.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we do have one more question from Finine, and I also wanted to highlight a comment from Lene, who's working with the Sami language technology, the Arctic University of Norway. So I recognize that it's a very different time zone for you, Lene, so thanks very much for joining us here. Finine's question is actually on Jeff Horner's work, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to address it, but the question is the interactive atlas being developed by Jeff open source, and / what stage is this at? Do you know if it is language agnostic?
So do you happen to know if Jeff joined in?
He did.
Okay. So I don't want to speak too much to his project, but I can tell you that it's pretty much in a prototyping stage right now, and I would expect that it'll be a while before it's like fully production ready enterprise type thing. I would give it some time. I know that definitely open source. Jeff's huge on open source, and my thought would be that I think he probably agrees with me that, like, yeah, we'll try if we can to make it language agnostic. But when you got a small team, your main focus is on doing what you're trying to do. And so I would say, yeah, if you want to know more, reach out to Jeff. I'll see maybe if I can collect an email, then I can forward that on to Jeff. And
awesome. Yeah, we'll try and get that question answered. Thanks everyone very much for your questions. Justin, would you mind sharing your PowerPoint now? We'll kind of take a look at what this program looks like from your eyes.
So hey everybody, I'm Justin Bambrick. I'm a junior front-end developer with South Coteen National Government. I'm from the community of Tlatinko, and that's in the South Coteen Nation. My skills have always been with art, mathematics, and critical thinking. And I went to Thompson Rivers University, where I attained an Associate of Arts in Psychology and an Associate of Commerce in Business. And my passions include art and hockey. Yeah, so my perspective leading up to starting with as a technical assistant. When I was in high school, I was always an artist. I'd spend hours each night just practicing, and I was eventually going to go to Emily Carr. I had a portfolio already, but unfortunately, towards the end of high school, I lost the steadiness in my hand, and it really hampered my art. So I let that go. So I decided to go to Thompson Rivers University, where I got the Associates in Arts and the Associate of Commerce and Business. And then I started working in fund accounting and small business accounting, creating tax returns. But after doing that for years, I wanted to get back into something a little more creative. So after I had a conversation with Aaron, I saw this as a good opportunity to get back into something creative where I can develop websites, develop apps. And so I got hired on in 2019, and I first started processing South Coteen language audio clips with Audacity, and then eventually got into learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and also the Angular framework for developing apps. So I started creating audio clips for the book of Genesis, which was read by William Myers in South Coteen. And this is where I got to learn more at South Coteen with three-way translation that came with these audio files. And my first big web project was contributing styling to our South Coteen language website. And you can check out our website at southcoteenlanguage.ca. And right now, we're working on our South Coteen Language Hub, which is in development. And I also created a sample web page where it's going to be used as a backup website for South Coteen National Government. And I have the code at my GitHub repository. Another project that I worked on was creating a 3x3 responsive grid that we're going to use in our alphabet app. And this is still currently in development, but I have the code at my GitHub repository. I've also contributed on helping start the WordPress website and doing the styling for South Coteen National Government's website. And this is at southcoteen.ca. And so my personal projects is my personal website, where I have I'm going to be putting up my resume. I have my portfolio on there right now. I have a bio, and I have my social media links, and that's at justinbambrick.ca. Another project that I started is a hockey news and ranking website, and I developed all the art for this website. And this is at bambrickhockey.ca. And in the future, I want to get more education in web development and design. I want to dive more into scripting languages like TypeScript, jQuery, and also more into design software like Photoshop. And I just want to keep using these skills to develop our language apps and continue learning Zeitkotin on the job. And here are some links. This is our links to our website, Zeitkotin National Government, our language website, and my personal website.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. So for everybody's reference, we're going to keep all of these links and you'll be sent them out at the end of the session. So if you want to check out any of the language websites or any of the websites that we've seen here today, you know, you'll have access to those links. So there's no need to write them down. Justin, I was wondering if you could walk me through what the 3x3 responsive grid looks like, or what that is. I'm not as techie as Aaron and you are, so I don't really know what that means per se. But you mentioned that it would be used in the alphabet, in an alphabet app of some kind.
Yeah, sure. Did you want me to demo it?
Sure, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do is create a responsive grid that works with any web browser, any size, and any mobile device. So this was one that took a little work. Like, so if iPhones are typically, a lot of iPhones are typically smaller, so compared to a lot of Androids. So we wanted to develop something that works on all devices. And yeah, so far this is still in development, but I got a responsive grid that changes whenever a screen is resized, or depending on what size the mobile device is.
I see. That's fantastic. Really enables breaks down some barriers of accessibility for individuals to access these apps and to learn the language within the community and beyond. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess I have a couple questions for you, Justin, and we'll kind of wait for the chat box here to catch up as well. One of the big questions for me, from your perspective, what was the most rewarding aspect of working with the language and learning these tech skills on the side? Like, what was your most memorable or rewarding experience?
Learning Zeitkotin and being able to understand and throw more words, maybe converse more with like my mother. My mother is Bella Alphonse, and she's one of the language champions, and just being able to talk more Zeitkotin with her is probably the most rewarding. And just getting back to creating art in a way where I can use my skill as an artist and develop things creatively.
Absolutely. One of the big takeaways I'm taking, from this whole session for me is that, creating spaces for Indigenous people to express themselves both artistically, but also to learn tech skills and kind of bring the nation as a whole, in terms of their language revitalization projects up another notch, right? If we're able to create these language apps and et cetera, and all these tools that you guys have been able to do, it allows that language learning to be that much more contemporary, I suppose, more accessible to a younger generation. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're still waiting for the, if you have any questions for Justin or Aaron, feel free to populate them. Aaron, I was wondering if we could circle back to the dictionary and the recording that you mentioned earlier from Denise. Now that we have a little bit of extra time here at the end of the session, so would you mind maybe walking me through that project a little bit there? What did that entail for you guys?
If we're looking at the recording method, so the recording method we use, and to kind of provide the constraints, one of the constraints is William Myers is just, like I said, tirelessly recording for his dictionary. He records out in a cabin where there's no internet. He's got kind of poor bandwidth internet at home at Unisight, but he goes out to a cabin where it's really quiet and he's got no internet. So the approach we decided to take, because early on when Bella had done all of these complex recordings to go with these paradigms, we had a really tedious system of naming the clips, and basically I'd go through and manually type out the name in this alternate writing system and put some extra little analysis there to keep them all distinct, and it was a nightmare. It just took forever. It was a big bottleneck. So what we do is every term, so word, phrase, sentence that's going to be recorded has a unique ID in a database, obviously. So what we do is we print off that ID number, and William will read the ID number, or Bella's used this method as well. Some of our other speakers have, but they'll read off the ID number, 125963, I am talking, 125964, you are talking, 125969, she is talking. So then what we do is we use English automatic speech recognition to label those clips, and that's automatically linked up with the database. And then what's left to do is anomaly detection. So historically, with the first big batch that William brought in, a rite of passage that Justin's been through, Riley's been through, Braden's been through, I've done quite a bit of it myself. We import all of this into an audio program. We usually use Audacity, and we import these labels, and then you just kind of scroll through and, oh, wait a minute, something went sideways there. That's not a, he coughed, or this is like 15 seconds long. Oh, he's making a correction here. And so we would manually label those things. But then the next stage to that is we're looking at using the statistics from the first batch to automate the anomaly detection for the rest. And I think that's about the fastest process you can use if you're under that constraint that you don't have the internet. If your speakers who are going to do these recordings have the internet, then what you should look at is look up Mozilla. Let's see. Okay, so Mozilla Deep Speech is their automatic speech recognition project, but then Common Voice is like a sister project where they're trying to crowdsource the language data collection, doing these recordings, the same kind of recordings for so that they can use them to train automatic speech recognition in all these different languages. So you can check it out in English. Just look up Common Voice. And I know Maori put something together. They built their own custom app, but it was the same idea. So look at that interface. If your recorders, your speakers that are doing the recordings have internet access, that's the fastest method. And I forget what their numbers were. The Maori, they did like 300 hours in like a really short time frame. There's lots of different speakers recording, and basically the text shows up, you read it, you record it, somebody else comes along and they can validate it and say, yeah, that's a good recording, or no, that's not. So that's the rapid recording side of things. On the other side of things, we're still catching up on our custom app. So the current version that you'll see published is a fairly basic. We started with fairly restricted paradigms, but the next version, when it's ready to go, is actually quite general. The idea is, I mean, we're using our model to present all of these complex paradigms. And so if you want to pull up a vocabulary list, or you find a term and you want to see a vocabulary list that it's in, the options that you get. So you get all of these little drop boxes and switches that allow you to change, I am going to give it to him, to I'm not going to give it to you, and even specify what it is. So you got all these different drop boxes, but those things are dynamic in our next version, so that you know, that template changes depending on what vocabulary list you pull up. And the way we're building that, it's actually not specific to technical chain language or related languages. You could even do things like, let's say that you have curriculum, vocabulary list for curriculum, and you want to say, well, give me all the words for Unit 3, Chapter 2. And so we're trying to, that's one project where we are trying to make it more language agnostic. But like I said, that's still work in progress.
Great. Awesome. So during your answer there, we had quite a few questions come in. So I'm just going to kind of go through them here as quickly as we can. So the first one being actually a question from Caroline. What other options are you looking into now that deep speech is being defunded? Or are you looking into other options?
Our kind of, so that's something that's kind of been on the horizon, the automatic speech recognition. And I think the point is now we're pretty close to the amount of data we need to. We're going to have to catch up on our, like I said, getting our kind of suite of language apps onto kind of their next generation stable version before we get onto that. So yeah, I'm going to have to look back at that. I think the plan was always, oh, well, if we have to, then we'll just work on training our own model. That's going to be a lot of work. But then when I found out about deep speech, I was like, okay, at least we can, you know, have a quick and dirty shot at it. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of time, but 10% of what it would be to give it a go from scratch. So that's news to me. So I don't have an answer, but I'll be frantically looking for one, I'm sure.
It's part of the value of coming together as a community, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome. So then, question for either one of you guys again. Randy asks, what sort of DB content would you need to be able to go directly from speech to a minority writing system?
So like I said,
oh, sorry, Randy has a clarification. In other words, how quickly could AI learn the minority language sounds and be able to accurately describe or transcribe, sorry.
So I would look up the work that, so we haven't actually successfully pulled this off yet. Like I said, we're really inspired by what we've seen, and I believe, I could be totally wrong, if there's anybody on the call who's from the group at Maori or knows remember some more details, I believe they had around 300 hours of, and it was, I believe most of their content was from this, you know, they had speakers reading this inventory of phrases and sentences, and basically the common voice approach I talked about. And I don't know that they had any, for example, you might have just transcribed conversations or stories, or, you know, there's lots of content from our radio we might want to use, and that's going to be of a quite different nature, especially you might have noise in the background, you might have people talking over the top of each other. And so the fact that they just had really one kind of data and 300 hours of it, I mean, on the one hand, when you work with a smaller language and you don't have a lot of funding, that's actually quite a lot of data. But on the other hand, it's like, you know, if you really push, it's doable. So we were really inspired by that, but I don't have a hard, fast number right now. And hopefully a year or two down the road, we can, maybe that's at least something we can say, you know, well, we had X amount of this data of this kind, and here's what we found. This, you know, it worked really well, or it was impossible to get it working. And it could always be that we just didn't figure it out very well. But at least, you know, if we pull it off, we can say, well, we did it with this much data. I think that's one thing a lot of groups are, look, you know, I've heard at conferences, well, you know, if you know anybody who pulls this off, and what's the number? Because if it's something that's achievable, if we could put, you know, a fourth of our energy or half of our energy into that for 3 years, and we're going to get there, great. But if we do that and we don't get all these other things done because we're chasing something impossible, yeah, maybe it's not worth doing. So we'll let everybody know how it goes if we get there. And if anybody else has results on that front, shoot us an email right away.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the last questions here from Steph. Curious to know what the capacity is for sourcing all the funding you've had to keep this work going. So I guess what does that grant writing and what does that kind of admin support actually look like to have that, you know, this project continue, or projects rather? And what would a full team look like? How many staff ideally to do what needs to get done? Um, yeah.
Oh yeah, really, really tough questions. Yeah, I would say that was definitely a big struggle with just managing all of this, especially managing the smaller grants. Like I said, it was great to have the bigger grant from the NRC that, you know, when you try to piece lots of small things, I think everybody in this work, everybody working at tribal council, band office, even universities, right, trying to do this work, it's always a challenge to try to piece together lots of small grants and make it feel like you have one coherent budget. One thing that TNG has done is they've brought in a full-time grant writer and a grant writer's assistant to try to take some of that load off of technical staff. And I would recommend, yeah, really think long and hard about that investment and kind of the administrative side of things before you get going with something like this. Because otherwise, you end up with, oh, you've got the technical people to do the work, but they're spending their time reporting and budgeting and doing the kind of administrative side of things, and then you don't get as much work done. So I don't know that I have the best answer for that. As far as what's the right size of team, I think that's really going to depend on what you're trying to do. But my recommendation, at least after 5 years of doing this kind of work, would be always try to build incrementally. I mean, of course, then you get that one big grant, you do just want to balloon up your team, but in an ideal world, you'd want to build incrementally, both in the kind of the scope of the projects you're trying to put out there and the size of your team, bring one person on at a time, and, start small and try to have a vision where you can kind of build towards where you're going without jumping to the finish line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. So at this point, I think it's pretty obvious for everybody that's attending. Heather wasn't able to join us today, due to a family medical emergency. So we pass on our sincere condolences and well wishes to Heather and her family at this time. So that's why we might be ending a little bit early today as opposed to usual. So at this point, I'm going to start kind of my outros for the Learning Circle. If anybody has any last minute questions or comments or anything that you'd like to have addressed here, please feel free to throw them in the chat box in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get to them before the end of the session here. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you both, Justin and Aaron, for joining us this morning and sharing your perspectives and experiences. It's been very illuminating for me. So thanks very much, guys. In terms of the Learning Circle moving forward, we're officially done January now. Into February, we're going to have sessions from the Northern Biobank Project. We're going to have a session from the FNHA on the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as other sessions throughout the month of February, including one on decolonizing sport towards the end of the month. So please make sure to check in our website regularly to see updates on those sessions that are coming up. Yeah, so I think at this point, just taking one last quick check. Lots of thanks. We have one quick question, which was kind of addressed earlier, but we'll kind of come back around to it, and I'd like to hear responses from both of you, actually. How do you feel that these projects have been impacting language revitalization in the community overall? Justin, maybe would you like to, from your perspective, how do you feel about language revitalization being impacted by these projects?
Well, developing more apps and is a good way to connect with the youth. I know my 5-year-old son, he plays the apps, and yeah, he gets to learn new words, and so that's pretty cool. So great.
Absolutely. Yeah, engaging the youth to take an interest in the language and to learn the language, but doing it on, in a way that's accessible for them in this modern world that we live in. Aaron, Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one thing is just like, you brought up earlier, is just having young technical people in the office doing the technical work and learning language on the job. I think that's really powerful. One thing that I think we've been missing out on with this whole COVID, though, is before all of this, we would used to periodically go around to the schools, and I used to love going to the community schools. We had a set of tablets that we would bring out, and you get instant feedback from the students, you get instant feedback from the teachers. So I have a few teachers who are reaching out to me here and there. Hey, how do I use the apps in my classroom? Or, hey, I'm looking for this resource, that resource. So that's good, but I really hope when the whole world goes back to normal, we can get back into the classrooms, because that was been one of my favorite parts of the job at TNG.
Awesome. Great to hear. So yeah, at this point, we're gonna sign off. Thank you all so much for attending, everyone in the audience and all the communities you represent. We really appreciated your time and your presence and your questions here today. So until next time, we'll see you all soon. Take care.